So if you've been in the world of web development for a long time, sometimes you get so mired in your own work that you kind of lose track of just how far the web has come. And for me, that's sort of happened with the Mutation Observer. In my mind, the Mutation Observer API is still a relatively new, relatively experimental technology. But if you look at the can I use data, Mutation Observer has been broadly available for well over a decade. It was even in IE 11, just to give you a sense of how long this API has been around. But to me, it's still fresh and new, and I need to remove some of that mystique, some of that mysteriousness by playing with it. So what I have here is this template, and inside of the template I have these two p tags, and you'll see that each p tag has an X controller attribute, and that is going to link to a JavaScript constructor. I have a function, a hello world constructor, and then you'll see that inside of this p I have some xref attributes, and what those are going to do is take these host elements and inject them into the instantiated hello world, which is going to be bound to this host. So essentially what I'm going to do is create a button that has a counter, and I'm going to have two of them. So let's just see that in action. So when I hit setup, what you'll see is that inside of this section we get a clone, more or less. It's really just inner HTML. I'm not technically cloning anything. We get an inner HTML application of these two controllers here, and you can see when I increment them, they are incrementing independently, and that's because I actually have two different classes being instantiated. Well, really just functions, not classes in this sense, but it's all syntax. Anyway, they're operating independently, and you can see that they're being initialized, instance 1, instance 2, and then when I'm clicking, I'm either clicking on instance 1 or instance 2, and now if I hit teardown, you'll see this section gets emptied out, and you can see that the two instances here have been destroyed. Now, this is working by observing the mutations on the document object model, and when it sees new nodes added, it looks for controllers and it instantiates them and binds them to the host, and then when it tears down, it tears the controllers down as well. And we can see that it's really just the inner HTML. So if we look at this, and let's say edit as HTML. So what I'm going to do is grab these two here, and let's actually clear this first. Let's edit this as HTML. If I strip this out manually and hit enter, what you'll see in the console is that both of those controllers are getting torn down. So let's hit enter, command enter, and you can see I've destroyed instance 3 and instance 4. Now if we edit this as HTML, actually let's clear this again. If we edit this as HTML and I go ahead and I just paste in the HTML that I just cut and I hit command enter, what you'll see is both two new instances being created. And the reason that that works as opposed to doing the setup and tear down buttons is because the setup and tear down buttons aren't doing anything special. They're just changing the HTML. The Mutation Observer is seeing those changes on the DOM and is in turn acting on the classes and instantiating things and binding stuff. So let's take a look at the code to see what's actually going on behind the scenes. Here's my demo, and here you can see are the buttons. And as I mentioned, when you click on those setup and tear down buttons, all I'm doing is setting the inner HTML of this section here, this ID playground section. And that's essentially what I was doing when I was cutting out the HTML and then pasting it back in. I was doing what the setup and the tear down buttons were doing respectively. And here we see in our template, I have my two Ps with my two controllers, and the X controller here is controllers.helloworld. This controllers.helloworld is really just an object path to this particular function starting at the window. And if we scroll down, you can see that I have a controllers, and this is var controllers, but really this is window.controllers, and hello world is just a key on that controllers object, which is itself just a key on the window object. So this, again, X controller, controllers hello world, is just a path to that class reference or that function constructor reference. And then internally, I have a couple of magic functions. I have on init and on destroy, and that's what my DOM watcher is going to be calling if they exist. And that's where we're getting our logging statements for initializing and destroying. And you can see that these setup and teardown methods respectively are just adding and removing an event listener for the button click. Now, if we look at what they're actually applying the button click to, it is refs.button. And if we jump back into the HTML here, what we can see is that the xref here for button is controller ctrl.button. And the xref syntax is scope and then reference name. And the reason that I have a scope here is because the DOM might contain all manner of controllers, especially nested controllers for all kinds of complex integrated functionality. So in order to make sure that the reference is injected into the right controller, you can use the xScope attribute to bind or to associate this particular host element with this particular scope, and then we use scope to make sure that this button gets injected into the right controller instance. I don't have any nested controllers in this case, but this was just something I was thinking about as I was putting this together. And you'll see here that I have this refs object, and that's what they're getting injected into. You don't need to supply the ref, but because I didn't want to have to deal with this function binding kind of stuff, I just wanted to supply my own. And that's it. So let's, I'm going to very quickly look at this watcher.js, which is the thing that's actually doing the DOM observation with the Mutation Observer API. There's less than 200 lines of code here, so I'll just go fairly quickly. You can see at the top here, I have my Mutation Observer. It has a callback function anytime it sees mutations taking place, but then that doesn't do anything in and of itself. You have to call observe on the Mutation Observer, and you have to tell it to actually look at a portion of the DOM tree. In this case, I'm just going to be observing the document body, and the type of changes have to be defined as well. So I'm going to say I want to look at the child list, when that means I want to look for nodes being added and removed from the document body element. And I also want to do that on the subtree. So by default, it won't look at deep changes in the DOM tree. It'll only look at direct children of the body element. But I want to say, actually, I do want to look at those deep changes deep within the DOM tree and react to those as well. Now, there are two interesting things to watch here. If we look at the handle mutation, so this is the callback that we provided to the Mutations Observer API. It can observe other things than just nodes, but I just want to look at nodes in this particular expiration. And when you do that, it'll have either a nodes added or nodes removed. So the really only two points of interest are these two methods, these nodes added and nodes removed. Let's look at the nodes added first. This will give us a list of nodes that have been added. Now these are just the root nodes that are added in a particular element, but we might have a complex DOM tree being injected. So we actually don't just want to look at the nodes, we want to expand our nodes of interest is what I'm calling it. And really that just expands the nodes that it's looking for. It's looking for the X controller and the XREF nodes. It'll iterate over these. It looks to see if there's an X controller. If it does, it gets that dot delimited path. From that path, it gets the constructor. It instantiates the constructor. It applies it as an expando property on the node. So actually, if we jump back into our demo here and we look at our p tag and we come over here and we look at our properties. Why are we not? Oh, I'm in the template, sorry. If we come over here and we look at the properties, you can see I have this expando property X controller, and that actually contains our instance of hello world. And you can see here are the refs with the button and the span that were being injected into those refs. So let's come back to the code. So we get our X controller, we have our controller instance, we get the refs, which is either something we're going to create, or if it exists, we're going to use it. And remember, if we jump back here quickly, I actually provide refs, a refs container within my hello world instance, and that's so that I can, again, not deal with the this bindings for my event handlers. Once I have my controller, I just push it onto the list of new controllers that I've collected during this DOM mutation. Then I move on to see if there's an XREF on the particular node of interest. If there is, I split the value. Remember, if we look here, it is a scope.name value. So I split that on the dot. I get the scope name, I get the reference name, and then I just walk up the DOM tree looking for that X scope with the right name. I get the controller instance from my expando property, and then from that controller instance, I get the refs, and I just inject the node into that refs container. So that's how I'm getting my controllers, attaching them to the DOM. Then I'm finding my refs, and I'm injecting those refs into the controllers. And then once I have my list of new controllers, so those are all the controllers that I collected as part of this DOM mutation, I loop over them and I call that onInit. So the difference between the constructor function itself and the onInit function is that the constructor function necessarily fires before the references have been made available, and the onInit gets called after the references have been made available, which is why inside of my onInit here I can bind event listeners to my button ref. And the handle nodes removed is the other flip side to this DOM mutation. And in this case, again, I'm just expanding my nodes of interest in this particular mutation and looping over them. If there's an X-controller expando property, I just delete it and I call that teardown method if it exists. And that's it. I mean, that's basically the entirety of this DOM mutation API exploration. It's not intended to be robust in any way. It was just intended to remove some of the mystique around this, what I thought was a new API, which is actually a very old API, a very broadly available API. And this will give me a sense, or a better sense, of how frameworks like Stimulus.js and Alpine.js, and I'm sure a myriad of other front-end frameworks, are using the Mutation Observer API in order to power their kind of declarative DOM bindings. And that's good. It's good to know about this kind of stuff.